welcome to another episode of Literary Gladiators, the show where we discuss and debate literature in all of its forms. If it's written work, it's game. Let's meet the panel.
Hi, I'm Larry.
Hi, I'm Jesi.
And I'm Josh. And today we are going to be going over one of Larry's recommendations, and that is The Road to Wigan Pier by George Orwell. And this is a political piece where George Orwell talks about and I would say advocates for socialism.
Yep, that's what it is.
That is pretty much what it is.
I would say that it's maybe more, instead of an advocacy for socialism, it is maybe a critique of, well, it's an advocacy in that it is a critique of how socialism is being discussed and seen in the time.
Agree.
Mm-hmm.
So the book is broken up into two parts.
Mm-hmm.
The first part is pretty much a description of working class northern English coal miners and their life and what they go through during Depression era Great Britain. And the second half is more of a discussion about the different brands of socialism and the different types of people who advocate for socialism and what impact it's having. So at the time of its release, when it was being published by a left-wing, I think the publisher was actually called Left Books, and the leader of the Socialist Party in England at the time did not want the second half published, only wanted the first half published. So to start this off, I just thought I'd ask, what do you guys think in today's time, like right now, what do you think would be the more important part, the first part or the second part?
I think it's interesting that a lot of the points that are brought up in this piece, we think a lot about it today. I know I do, about the different, just the different psychological points about how we as people are so detached to those that instead of sitting here talking about books, they're working in a coal mine just trying to keep everything going, our power, our heat, our electricity, and the conditions are just so the way that they're hunched over in there, it's just so claustrophobic, and the whole strain that it puts on them. It does pay relatively well, but it should for something like that. However, answering your question, I would say that the first part is an example. It is it's a bit of an experiment where he decides he's going to go hands-on with the issue at hand that the left book club presented to him in exploring unemployment and employment, and he uses that as evidence in order to strengthen his argument. The second part is more about his view, his person. The second part is more about socialism itself and his take on it and his arguments about it.
See, I don't think he does much arguing for socialism in the book. It's like he says virtually nothing about what actual socialism is.
He doesn't necessarily.
He spends a lot of time talking about what it isn't.
Mm-hmm.
But
I would say that much.
Like, how many times does he just say socialism is about liberty and justice? Liberty and justice. It's like, okay, those are two words.
I think by saying what it isn't, he is saying what it is. For instance, he talks about the reason that people are turned off by socialism is because they think that they are these stereotypical kinds of people, and that in order to be a socialist, you have to be able to eat cheese with a knife in a certain way, or you have to be, you have to do these certain things. But he doesn't really, I would agree with the fact that he doesn't necessarily make an overall statement until the very end, until the last chapter. But I think with his statements that are being made, the things that he's saying during the second half of the book, he's leading up to an argument and to what he thinks.
Mm-hmm. See, to me, it never comes across. Did you find it a compelling argument here?
I wouldn't say a compelling argument for or against socialism. I felt like at least in the second part, I mean, obviously he was talking about socialism, but I felt like he came across very sarcastic. And in a sort of way, like you were saying, how it's like, he basically says, oh, well, everybody thinks that in order to be a socialist, you have to be some sort of elite kind of person. And you have to have these forward-thinking ideas, whereas you don't have to be. And I feel like that's really all he said, whereas, like you were saying, he doesn't really say what socialism is. He doesn't really say what it's for. He just kind of lays out socialism. Is that a good way to say it? He just lays it out.
I would say that.
And that's why I do have to agree that, going back to your question, where they just wanted to, which I didn't know that they only wanted to publish the first half of it. I feel like, and Josh said it beautifully, the first half of the book is an example. He's basically, again, showing these people living in these, I consider them kind of horrid conditions, going to work in the coal mines and living in these houses that, like, if it had 3 holes in the roof, that was considered like a mansion. Like, oh my gosh, there's only 3 holes in the roof. There's no windows, and then kind of turning into the second part, going into, how to make, I'm trying to think, like, I guess how to make it better? Or, like, but he doesn't even really say it. And that's what I'm trying to say, is, like, he just kind of lays these things out. And I feel like, I personally, I enjoyed the book. I thought it was very, see, I can't even think of the word. I felt it was a complicated book. And I liked it, and I definitely liked reading the first half and learning about how the people lived. And then when I got to the second half of the book, it was just very sarcastic, as if he was just kind of brushing
bitter,
his,
maybe?
Yeah, maybe bitter is a better word, like just kind of brushing it off, but never actually going anywhere with it.
I think that's what
Yeah.
he's done.
Like, he just
It's like
laid
an
it out.
attack on everything.
Yeah,
Almost.
like,
It's
he just
like
laid it all
the
out.
socialists stink, the poor are in trouble, and
The
what are we-
fascists.
the fascists are terrible.
And
And we
then-
only have 2 choices in the industrial age. It's either fascism or socialism. It's like, okay, I mean, if you accept that as true, then socialism, but that's not true, obviously. I mean, we've lived for another 70, 80, 90 years, right?
And I think
since
there's
this
a
book
big,
was written.
it's a big difference between whether or not he made an argument and whether or not it was a strong argument, which...
It wasn't.
No,
I
it
mean-
wasn't. I think he was very dense in this piece. I think he's done better to argue good cases through his fiction. But I think that you can't say that he didn't make it, that he didn't try, which I think in the first part, I think his examples gave it a bit more of, he colored things in a bit more than when he just became a bit more philosophical or political.
Kind of, right? It's an attack on different parts of socialism, except for, he does say that the poor are the purest because they understand it the best.
Mm-hmm.
I
But
agree with that.
but he goes after the middle class socialists pretty hard, right? Right? Where he's like, they don't even like the poor. He's like, they want equality, but they think that the working class is going to come up to their level, and not that, or that's how it's going to happen. But that's
Yeah,
nonsense.
he did talk about all the different classes and the ones within, because he identified as lower, upper, middle.
Yeah, I thought it's all of them in.
You can't be a socialist unless you're
Yeah.
very class conscious, right?
Yes.
Mhm.
That's what you're looking to obliterate,
Hmm.
is the class of all kinds.
Mm-hmm.
But that being said, he is highly critical of that attitude of he's like, if a working class person was in the same room as most middle-class socialists, it would they'd be disgusted. They'd be absolutely disgusted by it.
I think there's some of the things, I think the employment and unemployment was probably more repulsive with how, back in the day when people were unemployed, they were actually ashamed to be unemployed. It was almost as if they were embarrassed.
Yeah.
And as time went by, as they became used to unemployment or the dole, which was government assistance, they became used to it. And I think we see a lot of that today.
Yeah.
I was
where
actually
people
gonna say that actually reading this book, maybe not the exact same, instances, but it was very easily put into, some of the things that you're hearing about going around in the world today, or at least within the last decade, I could say, with how unemployment is. And I mean, I've been unemployed. A few years ago I was unemployed and I was embarrassed by it. I felt like I was, lower than everybody else because I couldn't get a job or I lost my job. And I feel like in that book, I was able to kind of relate to the, as he describes the people who were unemployed and the things that they had to go through and how the middle class people kind of looked down on them and thought like, oh, you can't get a job. Why? Just
Or you're
go
just
get
lazy.
one.
And as
yeah,
shocking
you're
as
just
it-
lazy.
As shocking as it may seem, there are people that are employed that are jealous of those that are unemployed. They're jealous of the fact that they can spend the whole day on their couch, on their phone, watching television.
That was the other thing that I found kind of
Getting
interesting
government
too
assistance.
was, when they were talking about when the men were unemployed or laid off from coal mining work,
Mhm.
they didn't even help around the house. They
Mhm.
literally just sat there and did nothing and they were miserable. They wanted to go to work because, they couldn't do anything around the house. They couldn't do anything with the kids because that's not man's work. That's a woman's work. And even though nowadays, the men would probably help because, different kind of society, but essentially, you have the middle class, like you said, looking down on them saying, oh, you're lazy, like they want to sit there and do nothing when they're sitting there doing nothing, going crazy, trying to figure something out where they leave the house for the day as if they're going to work and they're literally just walking the streets, walking around, trying to find something to do, trying to find work, trying to find anything. And I thought that was, kind of interesting how it's a little bit different now where maybe not now, but I know of some people who are unemployed who have no problem, doing maybe a little housework, running some errands, and then just, having their leisurely time, reading a book, playing some games, watching some TV. I mean, that doesn't necessarily make them lazy. It doesn't mean anybody should look down on them, but at the same time, it's like, there's that difference where they have no problem doing that
And every situation
and
is
not
different.
going
too.
out. Yeah, every situation is different, but instead of, leaving the house at 9 o'clock to walk around until 5 and then come home, they're getting other stuff done. So I just thought that was kind of, it's the same, but it's different how the man, can't do anything because he's the man, he's supposed to be working, and now he's unemployed. So that just automatically means he's lazy when he's not.
And gender roles have changed drastically,
Yes,
which
drastically.
is, I would say, a good thing.
Compare, yes.
Do we have any final thoughts?
No. It's funny, I recommended this book. I hadn't read it yet. It was on a reading list.
That's not the first time it's happened.
Yeah, it was okay. I would say that, at the time when it was written, it's understandable, I think, for people to be sympathetic to socialism.
I agree 110%. I think that a lot of the information in here was dated.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Because
You
granted,
could tell.
it's a completely different, this is something that we're not as familiar with, being Americans in the 2010s. This is Britain in the 1920s.
30.
It was written in 37.
Yeah.
But I
And
thought,
a lot of the data that he used was from the 1936 numbers. So.
oh, okay, it was 36 numbers.
Yeah, but my point in that is that I mean, since then we've come about 80 years or so, and we've seen socialism pretty much seems to always turn into despotism or authoritarianism,
And a lot of that has to do with human nature. On one end, it's the fact that once somebody receives something enough, they begin to get used to it and feel as if they're entitled to that source or whatever it is they're receiving. And two, once the person that's leading and delegating it is able to acquire enough power, they become comfortable on their end, and they alter from a more everybody's in the same game to I'm the leader now. It's very much 1984 touches upon it, where somebody will campaign for a powerful position in order to provide everybody with an equal say, but once they get to that position, they begin to form into the same kind of leadership and tyranny that they were fighting off.
Yeah, or even, becoming more so.
Yeah,
More tyrannical.
in many cases, yes.
And socialism,
That's what happened in Soviet Russia, that's what happened in Cuba.
that's what's happening in Venezuela right now.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with socialism is that it gives too much power
Mm-hmm.
to too few people.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, capitalism, you could say does the same, but it does it on a much wider triangle.
With capitalism, people have the opportunity to make their way up the ladder. Socialism is much more restrictive and much more manipulative.
That's a good point. I don't know, I felt that, in the book, he kind of made, the middle class and the upper middle class sound very much like hypocrites in a sort of way where they wanted equality for everybody. And then they had no problem turning around and spitting on anybody who was lower than them. And I feel like that isn't something that's changed over time. Like, even though we don't want to admit it, there's something inside of all of us, I feel that, okay, yeah, we want equality, we want everybody to be viewed the same, but, you're walking down the street and you see somebody with a can going like this, but a bottle behind his back, of course somebody is going to think, oh, he's lesser than I am, just because we're, a different class, sort of. So as much as everybody wants to think equality, there's really never going to be that, because if somebody has anything less.
People are very much, they like to talk, is what it seems. There's the advocates that they have a cause they speak and speak and speak about, and then they're not as attacked. There's a great sense of detachment in many cases, in many areas too. And I think that with the working class, even with the military, I think there's a great sense of detachment between so many people, unless you're in a military family
Or
know somebody really well that's been in the military.
Yeah, it's amazing, and it's like, in modern times, it's easier to isolate yourself even further and further from different viewpoints because of the way, the social media is set up and everything, where you can just pretty much just like pick and choose who you want to associate with and who you don't, based on any factor that you see fit. So it's contributing to the problem, I think, more than it's resolving it. And the less that we socialize with each other in real life, the more progressive that kind of thing will be. The thing that you were saying about attitudes, that's another thing about socialism. I think where it can't help but be tyrannical, because you have to view the world in a classless way. In order to be a socialist, in order to actually live a socialist life, which requires such a tautology over thought, and it's just, it's either you think this way or you're a problem.
Yeah.
Already, how would you rate it on a 0 to 5 scale? Half stars permitted, Larry?
I would go 3.5 for this. It's Orwell. I like Orwell. Before I read it, honestly, I had no idea he was a socialist. I was looking around at his Wikipedia page earlier today, see if he got out of it. It didn't seem like he really did. It's just funny to me, because he recognized, I guess the way that he justified it was he made the Stalin-Trotsky kind of distinction where, you know, and that's what Animal Farm is pretty much about. It's like Trotsky gets chased off and Stalin takes over. But whatever. I don't know. It's just, it's not a viable system. And, you know, it's just seeing how blind he is to the fact that he doesn't even, he's got such an idealized version of what socialism is. It's liberty and justice. And that's all it is. So why don't we just do it already? Because we have to be collectivist anyway because mass production. So that's not. So the argument is bad. I like the first half a lot better because it's about actual experience and you know, hard labor and really, really interesting to see, you know, what went on behind the scenes in those days. So yeah, 3 now.
Jesse?
I'm pretty sure I actually gave this book a 4 on my Goodreads. Like, I'm almost certain I did. And I did. I actually really enjoyed the book more than I thought I would. And I was saying before, you know, when I was reading about what this book was about, I was like, oh no, I don't know if I'm going to make it through this book. But I did. I really enjoyed it, and I felt like it was, I mean, I like to read books like this because it is like taking a step back into the past and kind of viewing the world how it was from somebody who was actually there. I mean, we could read a history book all day long and never actually understand, but here we had, you know, George Orwell. He went and knocked on people's doors. He spoke to people. He went through the coal mines, and he was able to describe it, I think, in just such a way that, you know, as you said, it kind of made me feel a little claustrophobic. It really made me feel for these people where they're walking miles underground like this. And I just, like, and I mean, that just put me in a sense of, like,
And you have to actually, you have to do work too.
Yeah, not only did you have to walk those miles, you had to work, and then when the clock struck 5 and you finally got to go home, you still had to walk all the way back. So, you know, it wasn't like, that wasn't part of your work day. You had to get there. So all in all, you know, I think this book, you know, deserved a 4-star from my point, just because, again, you know, the content really gives you a glimpse back into what, you know, 1930s Great Britain was like, and I thought that made it, you know, a worthy book.
I give it 3.5. I think that there was a lot of very insightful information. I think it really reminded me of everything that's going on with socialism in our country. But I thought that there was information that was very dense, outdated, and I felt a little bit disconnected. And so I would say that it was moderately enjoyable. If I don't even know if that's the right word to use, because I don't know if this is something you can really enjoy, but it is something that I think it would warrant a reread.
I enjoyed it.
But
I'll be one of those that enjoyed it.
to each their own. If you're interested in checking out The Road to Wigan Pier, I got this copy here. And I've currently read Animal Farm 1984 and Keep the Aspidistra Flying. I would say this is my least favorite. I think Keep the Aspidistra Flying is very underrated, and I think that more people should check that and his earlier works out, when we generally view him for Animal Farm in 1984. Be sure to join us next time for another episode of Literary Gladiators. For now, keep reading.